Just the other day I was sitting down, looking through a picture book, wondering why you're not around. The time we shared is special now, when I think of you. Feels like time just seems to slip and roll through the fingers of this mortal soul. The heartfelt things come clearly now when I think of you. I know you can't be here, but my heart is beating strong, 'cause I know this love we feel lives on. When I see a sunrise fill the morning sky, I close my eyes and see you clearly in my mind. Emotions seem to cloud my eyes when I think of you. When I walk the lonely streets of this little town, memories of what might have been are lightly blown around. The raging storm is dying now when I think of you. I know you can't be here, but my heart is beating strong, 'cause I know this love we feel lives on. Can't be here, my heart is beating strong, 'cause I know this love we feel lives on. Love lives on. I like to stop and watch to see the pictures that it paints by evening light. I find myself looking deep inside, and pause to view my life through different eyes. And as I walk here in the rain, all of my earthly fears are gently washed away. This restless soul can feel secure, knowing the love we share endures, protected from the storm as I walk in the rain. Our lives are like these drops of rain falling in the night. Though blown by winds, they touch the earth again and give it life. So with each drop my life is born anew, and my life is rich with love because of you. And as I walk here in the rain, all of my earthly fears are gently washed away. This restless soul can feel secure, knowing the love we share endures, protected from the storm as I walk in the rain. And as I walk here in the rain, all of my earthly fears are gently washed away. This restless soul can feel secure, knowing the love we share endures, protected from life's storm as I walk in the rain.
have the family step up to the casket, please. Our family prayer will be offered by our brother Sam. I might be just a touch prejudiced, but damn, you guys are pretty. Mom would be proud, Dad would be proud of you. I'd like to welcome all of you here. It's quite humbling to see those who have made the journey to this life celebration of this beautiful soul, Joseph Lyman Jessop III. His journey in this life touched so many people. He was born July 21st in 1941. To me, that was a new light that came into the world. He was a man of his word, and he lived true. It always seemed that when he was done with a project, he wrapped it up fast, which he did. Very peacefully passed away in his home on January 31st, 2022. These funeral services on today, February 6th, 2022, are for the celebration of his life. And since he liked to make a party out of every trip and every journey, that's what we should do here, is celebrate it. Be very joyous, because that's what he would like. I would, in behalf of the family, like to take this opportunity to express gratitude for everyone who has helped in the comfort of Grandpa, and those who have assisted him through these last few years of life, for those who have helped us in many ways, be it financially or in any way assisted with his needs. I would like to express a very heartfelt thank you to Jim and Annie. Thank you for watching out after Dad. Meant so much to him. And Marge, thank you for taking Tim to his appointments. I'm sure you got to see all of his mountains again on your journeys, which he loved to point out. And thank you, all of you who have kept his spirits up through all this. When he lost his ability to communicate, it was really hard on him. But we could see that it really made his day when those of the family would come and visit with him. I'd like to start this program out with a prayer. The music, Prelude music, was of the family, and of Mom singing. We always knew she'd be there. And we'll start it out with a prayer from Lauren.
Our loving Father, come before you at this sacred and joyous occasion. Graduation services and celebration for our dear father, mother, and friend. We are so grateful, Father, that we were allowed to be a part of his great life, be witnesses of the way to live our lives to return unto you, which is our sole desire. Father, we know that you have taken him to his reward. We pray that you will now be with us, each one, that will remember him, will follow his example and his teachings, as he showed us the way. Love our neighbor. So thankful for him, his life and labor. Lord, bless his family, his children, his brothers, sisters, and friends, which I know covers everybody he's ever known. And Father, will you bless us to have your peace and your love like he did. We pray for your Spirit to be here in this exercise, sacred occasion. Pray this prayer in the name of Jesus Christ.
I had many, many opportunities as a very young boy to go with Dad on many trips, and he took me with him when I was barely old enough to remember some of them, and the joy that of those memories are just something I will always treasure. I remember his quick-witted way. He always had this quick wit. It would just catch you off guard sometimes. And my mom told me the story is right after they were married. My grandma Bradshaw turned 40 years old. And Grandpa Cyril come up to Dad and jokingly said, I should put out an ad that says, have wife 40 will trade for 2 20s. And Dad just, as quick, turned back to him and he says, well, Hell, Cyril, I don't think you're wired for 220. And that's just how he was. He just was so quick-witted. I enjoyed so many times working with him in the night. He had an old Peterbilt that he used to drive for hauling gas to the old gas station. But it needed a lot of love, so we'd work on it for most of the night, and then we'd drive for Salt Lake for a load of gas. And that thing was so slow going up the hills, and I would tell him, Dad, I can get out and run faster than this. And he says, well, if you see that bar right there on the front, he says, if you just get a hold of that bar and you just lunge, it will help this thing go up the hill faster. So there I was, this little guy, just lunging with all that I had, and I was sure I was helping that thing go up the hill. But those experiences were so fun for me. I had a little experience in Salt Lake. We had to stop at a parts store on our way back from loading gas. And as we went to go hit the freeway at 21st South, we rounded the corner there, and I'd been waiting for him in the little cubby sleeper I had on him. And I climbed out, got over on the seat just as we hit 21st South toward the freeway, leaned against the door, and the door popped open, and out I went, right out onto the sidewalk as he was picking up speed. And my shoulder hit the step and bounced me right over onto the sidewalk on my head. And, of course, Dad was shutting it down as fast as he could to come and gather me up. My concern was getting left in some strange neighborhood. So I was up and running after that truck. Dad come around the truck there, and he's, are you okay? And I said, yeah, I'm okay. I was embarrassed, And he said, looking at me, and he had this strange look on his face. He said, did you land on your head? And I said, yes, I did. He says, well, it's a good thing. You might have got hurt had you landed any other way. He says, maybe you better not look in the mirror. We climbed in the truck and headed down the road. That statement started to ring a little bit in my mind, like, don't look in the mirror. So finally I jump up and look in the mirror, and I'm completely missing an eyebrow. It has been just sheared clean off of my head. But those times, I treasure them. Dad was a hat man. I know it's very rare to see him without a hat. I was wondering if we should have put a hat on him so he could know he was ready to travel. He'd be taking a nap, and the phone would ring, and he'd jump up to the edge of the bed and grab his hat and slam it on and pick up the phone. Hello, ready to go. Never forgot his hat. He was a wonderful singer, and that was probably one of his most enjoyable times in life, is singing, especially with his sons. He got introduced to barbershop quartet, and I never was, I have to admit, I never was very fond of barbershop, but I was really fond of Dad's reaction to singing in barbershop, and he loved any time he could get singing barbershop. So he got affiliated with the what was that called, Toad? The Color Country Chorus. And he gathered me up, he gathered Toad up, and a couple of us went every week to go sing in the Color Country Chorus. And after practicing with them for some time, they got a show. We were singing for the judges convention here in southern Utah. And the dress code was a short sleeve t-shirt. And of course, we didn't have short sleeves. And he was a little bit concerned, so he made an appointment to check in and see what we could do about that. And he went and got an appointment with Uncle Rulin, and Uncle Rulin, he told Uncle Rulin what the situation was. And Uncle Rulin says, so the dress is a short sleeve t-shirt? And he says, yeah. He says, well, it sounds like you better be wearing a t-shirt because you don't want to stand out. The funny part was, when we put that t-shirt on, we hadn't been out in the sun. There was this, bright white, almost as if you turned the lights on. Me and Dad standing on the front row with our white bare arms out. And I thought it was really comical because Dad had told me we didn't want to stand out. I loved him so much. Well, thank you so much for being here. I know that he loved you, each one. And if you wondered if he loved you, all you got to do is remember he would just single you out and just talk to you, tell you stories, and show you pictures. He was proud of his family. He was proud of the accomplishments of his family and the life journey that he was on. Dad grew up very, very poor, without a lot of means. And everything he put into the religion, the life that he lived, his belief. He loved Uncle Roy. And just really felt like he had his strength in that. And just very much respect him for holding on to everything that he believed, and he taught us so much. And I just hope and pray that I can have half that love, the ability to love half as much as he did. This program will go as follows. We'll have an opening song from the Sons and Company. Brethren, we are his sons. Our brothers, we are his sons. Some life remembrance from Becca and Shirley. We'll have another song from Leanna's family. He is my friend. Written for Dad by Mom. And then another remembrance by Leanna and Buff. And a song from the grandchildren, Catch the Sunshine. After which, his best friend, Willie, will speak to us. I'll announce further from there.
My heart in joy now embracing gratefully. Brothers, we are his sons. The years fading by only make love grow stronger. Our love never fades, our love never dies. Now as you go, we'll always remember. Oh, brother mine, we are his sons. Each step in memory retracing, my heart in joy now embracing gratefully. Brothers, yes, we are his sons. We are his sons. We are his brothers. We are his sons.
Well, while Becca's getting our equipment all set up here, I just want to say that Dad didn't really often tell us that he was proud of us. He was quite hesitant to brag in any way, but one of the things he was very, very proud of was our music, and I was listening to all of us, all of you guys up here singing, thinking, Dad would say, "You done good, kid." And I'm also going to go on record as saying that I'm not going to cry, and if it looks like I'm crying, I'm not crying.
My dad was a different dad than some of the other kids had. Being the firstborn, I got the young dad. By the time little Margie and Jimmy and Sammy came along, he was grandpa dad. So a lot of what Shirley and I are going to share today is more parts of dad life as we knew it. And oh, this is my distinguished sisters. Shirley's the only distinguished one in the bunch.
Okay. So trying to put this together really brought into sharp focus in my mind how little I knew about Dad's younger life, because there was so much of it that was traumatizing to him, and he didn't ever talk about it. And so I had to put it together from stories I'd heard from his sister and from his mother, and some references I'd heard. My dad was the firstborn child to Joseph Lyman Jessop II, who was the firstborn to his dad and who was the firstborn to his dad. Soon after, Grandpa Jay and Grandma Leota had my father in Salt Lake City, they moved their little tiny family down to Short Creek in 1941, where at that time, almost everybody was living in tents, and it was a very, very harsh living. No one had money. Everyone was poor, but they did believe in sharing everything they had and everyone working together to try to build up this little town. Grandpa Jay and Grandma Leota soon welcomed Grandma Aline into their family. Dad's sister Diana had just been born when Grandpa Jay was killed in a logging accident at the age of 24. And so the little family joined Grandpa Edson's family. And Dad's brother Marcus, PJ, was born. Life was really, really hard during those years. My dad learned how to work very, very hard and not ask for much. And then 5 days after he turned 12 years old, I'm not crying, an event happened that would inform the rest of his life. And I know everybody in this audience has heard about the 1953 raid, and so I won't go into it, other than saying my dad lived in mortal fear of government and law enforcement for the rest of his life. And my dad believed in his community, and he gave his life to build his community. He ended up living in Phoenix for 2 years at a rest home with just he and his mom and his own siblings, and he didn't get to see his extended family for 2 years. He lived in Mexico for a time. He lived in St. George, and he lived in Salt Lake. But Short Creek was always his home.
Forgot the part where, when he was just a little boy, his dad was killed in a logging accident.
Didn't I say that?
She did say, okay, sorry. I'm a little traumatized too.
I think I've lost a few of my marbles.
I was back thinking about something else.
I will say, he ended up living in Salt Lake until he was 16 years old. And then Grandpa Edson went up on a motorcycle and picked him up and brought him home. He lived with Aunt Marjorie home for a little while.
Well, the reason he went and got him is because Dad was kind of full of it. Young Daddy was really full of it. He was the one of Short Creek's original adrenaline junkies. So now you know where I get it. But he learned, he's really good with his body, and he learned how to dance. And he and Diana won American Bandstand Jitterbug contest. They were just young teens, won all kinds of dance contests. And then he started dating this girl. Her name was Vicki Otterstrom. And she became the Grand Dame of Ballet West. But her mother wouldn't let him see her unless it was on the dance floor, because they really lacked on really strong males to help boost those girls into the air and stuff. So Dad started doing ballet, and he was really, really good at it. This isn't a story that Dad likes to tell, so I'm going to tell it because he's not here to defend himself. So he was getting really good at ballet. And I think that's why Grandpa went up to Salt Lake to pick him up, because that wasn't his path in life.
Dad always considered Grandpa Edson's children to be his siblings, even though they were cousins. I didn't even know that they were cousins growing up for a long time, because he never referred to them as cousins. They were always his brothers and sisters, and he always loved them as such.
I think my best memories are that we always had fun. Dad was kind of crazy, and we'd do things like just driving down the road, and all of a sudden he'd see a gravel field or something, and he'd have to throw brodies and stuff in it. And things like when there would be a big snow, he'd go find some old vehicle that had been junked, take the hood off of it, turn it upside down, weld a chain to the front of it, weld a couple of bench seats inside of it, and make a sleigh. But we called it hoodin'. We'd all pile in, and he'd drag us behind his truck or even his car. We'd go hood through town on the snowy roads. And lots of people would want to hop in, so they would. We'd find a hayfield somewhere, and the less adventurous would climb off, and the rest of us would get our adrenaline thrills while he flipped Brody's dragging us behind that hood. Whoever managed to hang on was pretty cool.
We only got whiplash 20 dozen times.
Dad wasn't one to say I love you out loud in that exact way. Until the last 20 years or so, he learned how. But it was more his style to show it. And he didn't do it by giving gifts, although he did that too, but rather unconventionally. It was by service. Dad would go to the ends of the earth for nearly anyone, but don't expect a damn Christmas present. Dad did things for people, especially those he loved. He used to make sure Uncle Roy's vehicles were serviced regularly. He'd get out of bed in the middle of the night to go rescue anybody broken down on the road, whether they had money or not. That was never even a thing. And I remember way back in the day when I was just a little kid, before we had Monday morning work meetings in our town, people used to come from Canada and Mexico to the Short Creek Valley like one weekend a month and build a town. Dad never missed that. He made sure he was there. And he taught people things. That was another way to say I love you. I can't count how many texts and things came in. People saying to me how working with Dad was the most impactful thing in their lives. Like literally it changed the trajectory with the skills that they acquired. And because I was the first kid, I got to go to work with Dad quite often. Then Joe come along and kind of ruined all that stuff. He was 4 years after I was. As soon as he was potty trained, he got to start going with Dad. But before that, lots of times I was the one who got to hold the flashlight for Dad. I know some of you guys know what I'm talking about. And the rest said, well, you never had to hold the flashlight for your daddy, and it shows. He taught, and we didn't have a lot of bikes in Short Creek when I was little. The ones we had were usually broken or just too big for me. So I learned how to drive before I could even ride a bike. And I rode out on the back with Dad, learned how to drive those, lots of big trucks. I could drive the conventional two-stick to the range changers. Lots of skills that are so automatic to me. It shocks me when people don't know how. Like, I remember driving down, he was letting me drive on the freeway. And I was doing the whole thing like they show in the movies where people are driving like this. I'd reach over and grab the wheel and just froze it. And I'm like, and he just said, just gently, very gently. You move it, it's just, and you'll make scoops in your tires. He explained all the things, why you don't want to drive like they drive in the movies. He says, you'll be more relaxed, you'll be a better driver, you'll get there in better time, all the reasons. There's lots more, but it surprised me when I get in a car with somebody and they're driving like movies. Kind of want to reach over there and grab the wheel. But knowing how to maintain a vehicle, I think, should be part of every kid's upbringing. There's a lot of other things that young Daddy would do too, like he'd pile Mom and the kids into whatever vehicle was available. We go creek bombing. Shirley, you want to explain creek bombing?
I don't know if everybody's been creek bombing. You have to call it creek bombing. You can't call it creek bombing. It's just not right. But he would get in his Jeep or truck or power wagon, things that now side-by-sides do. We'd do it in our truck. We'd go up the side of those hills, straight up, straight back down. We had a good time and tore those hills up. They're not the same anymore as they used to be.
And the old military power wagons later too. But there's this one time that stands out in my memory particularly. Our great-grandma that was my mom's grandma, Constance Annie Blanche Bitten Bradshaw, little teeny lady from England. She's about 4 feet 6 inches tall, she claimed. And she probably weighed as much as a mosquito. She was really tiny. Well, she wanted to come with us. She was going creek bombing with us. Dad wanted to show a really good time, really give her the whole immersion experience. She was sitting in the front of the pickup with Dad, Mom, and I. And she was sitting forward, kind of leaning against the dash, turned facing us, so she could have a wonderful visit. Well, Dad didn't think that was the time for visiting. You could see that his crick bombing skills were not making the desired impact. So he did his best to give her a proper scare. We shot up and down some pretty sketchy runs, even by my adrenaline junkie standards. It was pretty sketchy. Nothing. She carried on visiting like absolutely nothing. But Dad wasn't done yet. He had another trick still. One that the rest of us had yet to experience. There's this old earthen dam up near the top of the creek that is, you can drive along the top of it, it's nearly straight off to go down. And so Dad drove along the top of that. It came along to this edge and let his wheels just drop over the edge of it. And that made us so we were pretty horizontal, so we were basically looking straight down. And so she was standing, looking literally straight down, standing and looking. But she didn't even look at the first. He tapped her on the shoulder. He said, "Look, Grandma." And so she was standing straight up looking down at the place where we all gonna go die together. And she took a little look and said calmly, "Oh my, it is rather steep, isn't it?" And at that moment, Dad let go of the brakes. And as we shot down toward our certain death, I'm pretty sure we all lifted off our seats. And so Grandma was probably airborne too. We hit the bottom and Dad gunned the motors. We spun Santa in the air in a move that impressed any off-road enthusiast today. Grandma was completely unruffled. We might as well have been having Sunday tea on the terrace. She resumed her position against Dash, started chatting happily away to the rest of us bug-eyed survivors. I think Dad gained a lot of respect for her in that. He thought it was really cute, and he told that story a lot. In the 1970s, late 60s, early 70s, CB radios became all the rage in Short Creek. Pretty much every vehicle had one, and lots of houses had one too. Ours did. In fact, it served as a telephone for quite a few years because we couldn't afford a telephone. When my dad would be coming home from work from Page, when he got to where we could hear him, like probably out by Jacob's, like he'd start trying to get a hold of us. We rode Channel 2, and he would do the whistle. We'd hear, we just a faint whistle coming over. I'm whistling like, and we'd oh yay, as kids start running around getting our jobs done, because we wanted to go do something fun with Dad when he got home. So that was always a lot of fun. There were great memories. Another one of the memories of the CB radios from my kidhood. I'm sure Uncle Josie, if he's here, remember this one pretty good. They had what they would call a skunk hunt. A bunch of adults would bring their vehicles and meet somewhere like this school and decide who was going to be the skunk, and then they'd give the skunk a head start, and the rest would head out to find them using CBs to communicate. They had a certain amount of time to catch them, and if not, the skunk won. One time my mom was a skunk, and they almost caught her. She whipped around a corner and turned off her lights and pulled into a row of junk cars, because we had a few rows of them back in those days. And everyone went speeding past her. Winning that skunk hunt was some of the most fun I can ever remember. In the late 20-teens, Dad started attending coffee gatherings with a group of friends in Short Creek. This is Grandpa Dad now. They became the most important thing in his life. But I think pretty much only Jim knew about them, because I sure didn't. When he first ended up in the hospital, it was because he had developed an ugly case of cellulitis in his leg, which by the time we saw it had compartmentalized, and it was seriously life-threatening. And the only way to treat it was hospitalization. That did not please Dad. He kept telling us he could not be in the hospital. He had some very important meetings to be to. Critical he was there. His leg was going to be just fine. Just take me home. We're being silly. We said, "No, Dad, you're staying. Can we call someone and move your meeting?" He said no. He still didn't want to tell us what it was or what they entailed. who they were with. But he got really frustrated that us sassy little brats would not let him go home. I teased him a little bit. I said, "Damn it, Dad, I know how you feel. Sucks being grounded, doesn't it?" When we learned his very important meetings were with all his friends having coffee, I think most of us kids were pretty insensitive. We didn't realize how important it was to him. I'm ashamed to say I didn't understand how important these times really were to him. I didn't realize it wasn't just coffee. It was gathering with his peers who worked to build up the kingdom together through all the years, and it meant the world to a lonely old man who by some measure had lost a great deal of his usefulness to society. I want to say thank you to the bunch that gathered Dad up and spent time with him, remembering the good old days. If I have any regrets, it's this. If he couldn't go to coffee with the brethren, then I would have found a way for the coffee with the brethren to come to him. I knew it was really hard on Dad when he couldn't renew his CDL and he wasn't employable as a professional driver. And he tried really hard to keep going, but it just kind of shut him down. And I saw him kind of start shrinking and stuff like that. But to this day, my dad is still the physically strongest man I have ever known, even as his life force was ebbing away. He still had a mighty grip, and it was incredible upper body strength. He also believed in being emotionally strong, too. He wouldn't suffer in front of people. He'd just withdraw to do his private suffering. Every time I'd call him to see how he's doing after Mom was gone, he would always say, I'd say, "How you doing, Dad?" And he'd say, "Oh, pretty good for a kid my age."
We were never, ever wealthy. My dad worked so hard, and he didn't get paid a lot. But he taught us to learn. He taught us to serve, and he taught us to work hard. He felt it was a privilege to serve. In our family, we had a saying, "We're lifters and not leaners." And boy, did my dad's identity really get served by helping other people. And so when Becca talks about how hard it was for him to not go out, I will tell you the number of phone calls I got with him in his last couple of months saying, "I have to get out there and help those guys get that truck on the road." And he so desperately wanted to be in service every waking, breathing moment of his life. He protected us, kids. The experience of being taken from his dad had such a huge impact on him that he never, ever wanted to go a minute without knowing where all of us were. And so even as we got older and had our own families, he wanted us to call and check in with him when we were out on trips to make sure we were safe.
He did too, on that note. The first time I drove to Phoenix by myself to go down and meet Garth, he said he wanted me to wait another day so he could take me down. I said, "No, I'm driving today." And it was pretty hard because he didn't like me sassing him, but he wasn't my boss anymore. So he says, "Well, I want you to call me the minute you get there, because if you don't call me by a certain time, I'm coming after you. So if something happens, just stay in your vehicles, keep it locked, and I will come and get you." I said, "Okay." Well, I called him 5.5 hours after I left. He says, "Are you to Flagstaff?" I says, "No, I'm in Phoenix." "Becca, what the hell? You know how fast you would have had to be driving to get to Phoenix in 5.5 hours? I said, "Dad, if you're going to bitch at me when I call you, I'm not calling anymore." But it was so nice knowing that was my life and that there was always someone there like that for me.
And for all you young whippersnappers, this was back in the day before cell phones, and we had to pull over and find a payphone to call him.
That's true.
That was not just a simple little thing. Sometimes Dad was hard on us because of the harshness that he was raised with, but we always knew that he loved us. And like Becca said, he didn't always say it with words, but we knew when he was proud of us, and we knew especially about the music. He always wanted us to share our music with people, and that was part of our hearts, that we'll always have him in our hearts. When Dad was sent away from home, it shattered his heart, because the only thing he ever wanted in his entire life was to build up the community that he had become part of when he was a baby. And so when we were able to bring him home in 2016 and go back to his home, it meant the world to him. And I'm so, so grateful that he was able to do that, and for his family taking care of him when that happened.
When
She's not crying.
I know when Dad crossed over, he went where he wanted to go, because as his body was shutting down and he was way past the ability to communicate, he was laying on the bed. All of us kids were surrounding him. We were touching him, holding his hand, his leg, his foot, just any part of him. And his eyes were closed. And suddenly he acted like he was very glad to see someone. He made it sound like he was saying hi. I said, "Oh, Daddy, you're so happy. They're here for you." And he made the same sound again. And I asked him several different names if they were there, and he would respond if they weren't. He didn't respond if they weren't. When I said, "Is Uncle Roy here?" he said, "Uh-huh," so loud. It was the most joyful shout any mostly dead person could ever give. That was a very happy, tearful room. So if Uncle Roy came to get Dad, I know he went where he wanted to be. I hope when my dad sees me now, he likes what he sees. I think he and Mom did good. I turned out pretty good for a kid my age.
Well, I will just stand right here and keep it warm till she comes back.
Hello, everyone. Me and Buff, we are going to talk about things about
The middle part.
the guys. Yeah. We're kind of nervous, me being we,
And me.
the royal we. So, Dad married Mom, March 22nd, 1963. And at that time, he was working on the Glen Canyon Dam. And they were a cute couple. I always hear that. But they had a few, like a day or two to get acquainted and what have you. And then it was time to go back to work. So Dad says, when the guys drive up, let's kiss in the house, and then when we are out on the front porch, then we'll shake hands, just to tease them, you know, because they're all going to be watching, you know. And so he steps out on the front porch and shook Mom's hand, said goodbye, and got in the van. Jack Cook was the one driving. And he's like, no, you are not just going to shake her hand. You guys are married. You go right back in there and kiss her. And Dad's like, well, I guess if you insist. And so he went back in the house and he's like, I'm supposed to come kiss you again. So, they all the way to Paige, he was lectured about being affectionate to your wife, making her feel special. So the next time they came to get him, they stepped out on the front porch and Dad dipped her and kissed her. Theirs was a passionate marriage. And they argued loudly, laughed often, loved deeply. So drama was our way of life. Everything we did, clear to every corner of the room. We didn't do anything timidly. We didn't know that was a thing till we grew up and saw other families, and then it was like, what's the matter with you guys? How come everybody's so quiet? But everything they went through, and they went through some times, but they fiercely loved each other. And that love just got stronger. One time I was just newly married. I asked Mom, what's the best thing about being married to Dad? And she didn't even hesitate. And she said, my best friend. She said, he's my best friend. We grew together. Thank you, Daddy. We became soulmates. And I said, I asked her if she loved him as much as she did when they first married, when he was young and handsome. And that was back when I was young and handsome and didn't realize how much beauty came with age. So she said, who? Oh, that guy. I don't know him anymore. He's evolved into this amazing and perfect person who I wouldn't trade. I would never trade this man for that one in a million years. Then, of course, she always talked about the Velveteen Rabbit and how real love shows up in all kinds of rubbed off fuzzy ways. So our parents, they taught us how to love deeply and
completely. That's what I remember about their marriage.
Dad married Aunt Lucille Zitting in 1969. And so she was with the family only for 13 short months. But he had 3 children when she came into the family, and it delighted him how much she loved Becca, Leanna, and Joe. They were so adorable. And if her and Mom ever had misunderstandings, she'd gather up all the children and take them so Mom could go get a good spirit. And she'd haul the children and go have a picnic or whatever. And she taught them all the little 20 froggies and any other cute little song. When Dad drove big rig, and when he get in and put his hat on the gear shifter, and if he started to go to sleep, then she'd knock his hat off to tease him, make him wake up. After she passed, then his hat was sitting on the gear shifter, and he kept feeling her presence, but he just was like, you know how it is. And finally he said out loud, if she were really here, my hat would be on the floor, and kerplop, his hat was on the floor. While he was passing, the room got really quiet, and we were just sitting there peacefully enjoying each other's quiet company. And a cup that was on an end table jumped off and landed on the floor, and I said, I think Aunt Lucille's here. So we all laughed and had a good one, and about a couple of hours later, when it got quiet, a blanket that had been sitting there innocently folded for however many days it needed to just sit on there, jumped off and landed in a heap on the floor, so everyone said, we know you're here, Aunt Lucille. We feel you. I was the next girl born after her death, and so I got to have her name. And Mom and Dad always told me this story so that I could live with her in my life since I missed out. And just a minute. I felt like I needed to be all of that for Dad and keep her alive, because they made her alive in my life, and so I was the one who would remember their anniversary and remember her birthday and happy, happy, joy, joy. But she died when they had planned a birthday party for Father, and she died on his birthday, in essence. And he wouldn't let us have birthday parties for him. It was like, no, this is not our happy time. So if we ever asked, then the answer was no. But one time when he turned 50, well, one time, the only time he turned 50, then all of our family, Grandma Sanders and all the cousins, everybody came from Salt Lake down to celebrate. And
It was a surprise.
he found out when we said surprise, so he didn't get to tell us no. And we were all in the living room, and Grandma was just, she was loving all of the kids, and the hearse drives up out front, and she's like, JL, JL. And when she got excited, her voice kind of got high. She started squeaking, there's a hearse outside, and I am too young for this. And Ted came in with a cake and a Stetson hat for Dad for his 50th birthday. So it was like a big surprise that day. One time I went in, he'd been working all night. He'd gone out on a job, and he was just all day, all night. He came in, he said, I need to have a 20-minute nap. Will you wake me? Please remember to wake me in 20 minutes. So I went in there. I made it the longest 20 minutes that I knew I could. So maybe a half hour. Don't disobey, okay? And I took a hold of his foot, and I said, hey, Dad, it's been 20 minutes. And he sat up and put on his hat and picked up the phone, and he said, hello? I'm like, you need more sleep. It's me. But he 100% gave of himself his entire life. He helped us remember Jessops are doers.
And speaking of Jessops, he was super, super proud of who he was and his heritage. So proud of his Jessop lineage. and so proud to call Grandpa Jay and Grandpa Edson his dads. Grandpa Edson's kids, like Shirley said, none of them were his cousins. And true, we didn't realize that they weren't his brothers and sisters. Aunt Margaret was so good to Dad and all of us, always. She wrote this to Dad she just wrote this about him in 2001. What I think about when they say JL, I think of a big brother. I never had to be concerned about brothers for my girls. They had 7 of them before I ever had a son. JL was very good looking, and she told stories about how he would walk into a room and all the girls would just look at him and smile, and she said, I promise their eyelashes got longer. But she said he didn't seem to notice. Probably did, though.
Not in front of her, he didn't.
And he loved to read, so much so, this is what she said, so much so that I had to get his father Edson to remind him that someone else needed the cranny, although he hadn't finished that particular article in the furnished tissue that we had in the back house. And she said he was very knowledgeable about every subject. She said that his father, Jay, she'd feel his presence often. And when he was, a struggling teenager, she felt that he was concerned for him. And one night she couldn't sleep, and she said that there was a house full of people, and among them was Dad, and she said that she just kept thinking of his father's spirit, and she couldn't sleep, and every time she'd get to sleep, then he'd come to her in a dream and say, hey, I need you to reach out to him. So Grandpa Edson said, get up and write those words that you're hearing. And so she did, and then she was finally able to rest, and the words that she wrote to him, he felt like that was the word of the Lord to him, because it was saying, you are meant for great things. Please don't be discouraged, and don't give up. Don't quit. So he became a missionary, and one of those who lived in our home, somehow he was given the job of cleaning the stairway that leads to the upstairs bedrooms. She said he did not give it a quick go-over. Even after she retired, he was scrubbing every teeny tiny little crack and crevice. And she said he was a perfectionist. Whatever he set his mind to do, did it well. As he became older, he could explain the scriptures and all their meaning. He knew them like the back of his hand. And he was Uncle Roy's mechanic. Uncle Roy would have no other mechanic. And she said, what meant the very most to me in the past, Edson was very close to his brother Jay. And as JL became older, Edson found in him, again, his brother Jay. And on special meetings that they both attended, they would converse long afterwards. And I remember Dad, Grandpa, and Uncle PJ sitting in the car for hours and hours. And I remember it was hours and hours because after those meetings, we were supposed to have cake. Sometimes we waited a lot. But they got some good meetings in there, I'm sure of it. So, when she said, when JL was young, other boys who could have become great discouraged him. But now he has soared ahead of them. We thank the Lord for JL. And do you want to read this? You guys' trips to King County. So we had asked some of the people to write stuff about Dad. And I particularly found this one adorable because our adorable cousin Lily, just between me and y'all, I think she was supposed to be in our sibs. Because but anyway, I think she thinks that too, because she wrote, "To Uncle Jay, when asked to write a remembrance, I thought of a lot of things that have happened. Our families have always been so close, and many of our happiest times have been trips and activities with you and Father. I remember you coming to Salt Lake and staying with us several times. One time, we were watching a TV special when your family arrived. You said you'd started watching that same special at home. Can you imagine the mind of a 5-year-old wondering just how fast you drove to get there? I remember one time you were sleeping on the couch, snoring, I might add, and Joe came in and gathered us up and dared us to put him on the floor. So a whole passel of us kids grabbed a hold of you, and oh my goodness, we dropped you on the floor. In fascinated horror, we watched as the sleeping giant slept on. And Dad told me later, I was not asleep." One time, Shirley and I were canning fruit, and it was quite late when you came home, but you stayed up and helped us finish and get it cooked up. I remember thinking that that was just what my father would have done. And Dad, I'm sure, is who instilled in us, me and her, the love of putting food by. I totally love to can. Every time we have gone on a trip, you've made it memorable and fun every time for everyone. Sometimes it was just hooding around in that old yellow and white truck or going to Zion's for a picnic. And other times we have gone so far as Lava Hot Springs and Kings Canyon. But whatever we were doing, you have made it so much fun. Do you remember holding the speakers on the hood of Toad's truck so we could line dance in the parking lot? And we totally were a show. Wherever we went, we just like start singing and gather a crowd. Kind of weird. This is just one of the many happy times I remember. I remember telling Mother that I was just going to have to go live with Uncle Jay's guys because I just don't think she appreciates me quite enough. With love and appreciation, Lily.
One thing that I remember about the Kings Canyon trip is it got pretty heavy, but Father was the one carrying the load, and he didn't let it seem like he was doing that much work. But as an adult now, looking back, wow, he was a very strong man. He carried everyone's emotions.
Our parents were very, very proud of us. I know, even though it didn't come out in words so much, but he always made us sing and play for whoever came along. And I didn't quite understand why it was so, I just didn't see how having musicians for kids was all that extraordinary. And I didn't know why he wanted to hold his guests hostage while we sang and played for them. But, but they were always so kind and encouraging. And then I grew up and I had musicians. And, well, you know how it went. So, but Dad always said, singing together makes a family stronger. And nothing creates harmony like harmony. So I remember him telling me, I said, Dad, if you could give me any parenting advice, what would it be? And he said, sing, for hell's sake, sing. So.
He was always very positive, and if you started being negative, he would help you along. When I was younger then, he told me, I started feeling like Mom was picking every little thread, and I was always feeling like she was picking on me. I said, Dad, Mom hates me. And he said, nope, and you're not going to talk like that. It's impossible for your mother to hate you. I want you to understand, when you're driving a car, you can't just hold the wheel straight. You have to do little adjustments here and there. That's all she's doing. She's keeping you straight. And if you won't say that anymore, you won't believe it, and you'll start to see the truth.
He liked to spread sunshine and smiles, and he called the sun smiling. The sun, if it was shining, it was smiling. And the sun was shining even if there was a cloud over it. because there's always a silver lining, and he always found in everything that happened, he'd say, you know what I love about bad days and hard times? What do you love about that? Because it makes the sun shine that much brighter and the good days that much better. He always found the positive in everything that we did. He found the positive. Before we go into that sunshine thing, I would like to talk to the sibs, because I learned how to love my siblings by watching my parents love theirs. And so I'm going to try to get through this thing that Donia wrote. Donia, thank you for writing this for me. As she wrote this to her siblings, and I stole it. There is no amount of preparation you can do to be prepared for the loss of a parent. Nothing can prepare you for the intense pain you feel inside while you hold someone's hand as they quietly slip away. Nothing. In spite of dry lips, moistened to give comfort, gently adjusting them to ease their pain, seeing them whisper, I love you too, to the many friends and family who come to say goodbye. No amount of holding families as they cry their last goodbyes can make you ready. There's not enough vitamins, food, exercise to get beefed up and ready for the blow. There's only waves of pain, loss, regrets, memories, joy, and tears. So many tears. And just when you think you're okay, and you wonder why you let little things that seem so big when they were happening drive a wedge in that precious relationship between a parent and a child. Why you wasted time being angry, blaming, accusing, when we have to know that every parent gives every piece of their heart and soul to each child. The entire thing to every one of us. They give everything they have in their capacity, and each parent has just a different capacity. And I'm so grateful to each of my parents' capacities to love and to give to so many of us, and for each one of you, my siblings, who just get it, because we were built from the same stuff. I need to say this to you. So you know for certain that I love every one of you. And you have pulled me through so many stucks in the muds. You will never know. She didn't write that, I did. Because I knew I was loved no matter what. So for my sibs, this is me now. I love you all. I love everything about you. I love that we were each one Dad's favorite and Mom's favorite. And that we had so much love for each other and faith in each other that they graced this planet with 11 amazing, wonderful, passionate, perfect and improving, as Mom would say, talented and forgiving humans that upset the apple cart, kicked our butts, drive a hard bargain, pack a wallop, defend each other fiercely, argue loudly, know everything, and love deeply. We are each other's critics, best friends, and most of all, we are the reflection of Mom and Dad that keep them alive and on this planet. And oh, look, there they are in our kids and grandkids. We are the O of what happens. Look at us. We are what would happen if JL and Kathy decided to have kids. We're the motliest crew of orphans since Uncle Bry died. So, I just want to say that I love you all, and I'm so, so grateful that we're here for each other. And I wouldn't choose anywhere else to be about sunshine.
So we had the grandchildren sing Catch the Sunshine because that's the song Father would sing, and he also would play it, so
It was the only song he knew on the piano. So, when I was just a little bitty kid, I heard, my dad would always sing Catch the Sunshine and Happy Today for the Sunshine and Smile and sunshine songs. And this one day, started playing it on the piano. And I went running over there, me and Becca, with big eyes, like, holy moly, you can play? And he was singing it to us, you know, catch the sunshine. And I looked down at his hands, and there was, in my memory, it was a goat head sticker, but Becca said it was a push pin. And it was stuck in the end of his finger. And I'm just like, the piano was right here. And I was just looking at it like, the sticker, got a sticker. And I thought any minute he was going to play that and feel that poke his finger. And he's just looking at us. He never used this finger in that whole song. Never did. He just never did. And like, that's where my memory ends. But you know what? It just occurred to me like I was today years old when I realized he was probably teasing us. It sounds like I don't know. But so he wanted me to smile. And every time I would cry, I had clouded up and rained. And he took me one day, he took me aside. I was probably 8 years old. I could just see into the buffet mirror, and he's like, come here, I want to show you something. You see that sad face? I need you to make that little girl in there smile, and I promise you, if you'll make her smile, she will make you smile. And I fought a smile for a bit, and then, oh, sure enough, and the sun came out. There's our sunshine. And he was always trying to cheer us up. And as I got into the 13 and 14-year-old, he incorporated guilt. Where's my happy little, smiley little girl that always, you know. And I'm telling you, if he ever starts one of those lectures, you're best to just pull up a chair, Chief, because Dad doesn't deal in the abridged version, you know what I mean?
Nope.
So, yeah. So now we will sing, right? Are we?
Catch this.
Okay. So, Catch the Sunshine.
Cheerful man, he always had a happy smile for me. And when the day was dark and gray, he would know just what to say. Then he'd sing me this song. Catch the sunshine, though it flickers through a dark and dismal cloud, though it falls so faint and feeble on a heart with sorrow bowed. Catch it quickly, it is passing, passing rapidly away.
so glad to have with me. The way my grandpa helped me see the beauty a dark day could be. I'll think of him as I sing this song.
Catch the sunshine, don't be grieving, or the darksome billow there. Life's a sea of stormy billows, we must meet them everywhere. Pass right through them, do not tarry, overcome the heaving tide. There's a sparkling gleam of sunshine waiting on the other side.
I think the first time I met Jay, Uncle Roy had told me to go over to his place. Check out one of his daughters. That was his words. Go over there and check her out. And I had a brand new pickup, and Jay had been steam cleaning a trailer off, and it was all greasy and everything, and big grease mud puddle there. And didn't even see that mud puddle. I just drove up there. Drove up there, and I think I drove through about 8 feet of grease and a nice red and white pickup. And he started cussing me out. I rolled the window down as I drove up there, and he started cussing me out about these young boys that are getting these new trucks, and they didn't have any respect for those things. And that went on for about 5 minutes, and I didn't know what to say because I was in shock. And he's like, "Well, young man, what can I do for you?" And I says, "Well, I came over to check out your daughter, see if I liked her." And he's like, "Give me 10 minutes, will you?" And he jumped in his truck and roared off. And I guess what I wanted to say was, be careful about your first impressions on people, because he really liked me, and whenever he needed to say something that he didn't want the world to know about or his family to know about, he'd come and find me, and I was always a good listener. And So I'd listen to him for a while, and he'd always stop by and pick me up in his semi in his later years, and it was pretty humbling to me after he got where he couldn't really say what he wanted to say. And he would still come and get me. He'd come over to my house, and he had this little golf cart, and he'd get me out of the house, and we'd walk out there, and he'd point at his golf cart, and we would just kick the tires for 10 minutes. And then he was happy and drove away. And had a lot of experiences like that. I really appreciate the example that he was to me, and he loved me and all my family. He was very proud of you guys. And I think I've become his oldest son. Pretty sad to see him go. I know that he just wants us to carry on. And if you ever wonder what was important, then he would say it is you. You're important. Just love all of you guys. I love everybody that I see. Thank you very much.
The program will continue with Marge and Jim doing another remembrance and a song by Marge. My Daddy, My Hero. And then Uncle Alan, Dad's wonderful brother in the work of God and true friend, will come and tell us some fun stories. After which, the family will sing, I'll See You Again.
One of the men that my dad really loved and respected was Uncle Fred. Uncle Fred would always say that funerals are for the living and not for the dead. And Dad agreed with that. He really liked it when funerals could be like this, where people would just be remembered. It was my honor to be the one that got to take care of Dad for the last 7 years. I had actually had met with the guy that my dad was renting a house from in St. George. And the landlord there, he came and took me aside and he says, I'm going to do something for you that nobody did for me. He said, my dad got sick, and I didn't know until it was too late. and I don't want you to experience that. He says, I want you to take care of him. He says, be there for him, and you'll never regret it. Because if you don't, you will regret it. Now, it was in 2014. I called Dad, and I told him I wanted to move home and start taking care of him. But at the time, he had Ronald Jessop, Uncle Joe S. Jessop's son Ronald was living with him, and Chachi Zitting was living with him. And I called him. I says, Dad, I want to move home, start taking care of you. He says, oh, I'd love to have you move in with me if it's okay with Chachi. I says, well, I'm your kid. I mean, didn't I come first? And he's like, yeah, if it's okay with Chachi. Have to find out. That's how things work. But Dad used to take me trucking with him. And I didn't always love going trucking with him because, you know, in the beginning it was always fun. Going to Kings Canyon was that's a extremely memorable trip for all of us. But towards the last few times that I went trucking with him, they weren't really fun for me because usually I was going trucking with him because I was in trouble. And there is no way to escape a truck that's doing 80 miles an hour down the freeway. You get to listen to that. But he always made it very, very memorable. It wasn't a lecture the entire time. He always would finish it up with, you know, Jimmy, I just love you and I want the very best for you. He wanted the very best for everybody. So I swore I would not get a CDL. I was not going to be a truck driver. It was not my calling. I wanted to be a musician. That was my calling. And I told him, I says, Dad, I'm never going to be a truck driver. I'm not going to follow that path. So in 2012, when I got my CDL, he was pretty happy about that. But I would call him when I was on the road. I'd call him in different areas and tell him where I was. He always loved to hear, you know, where the drivers were. And I didn't actually know exactly how much it meant to him to know where the drivers were around the country. Till one day I came in and I wanted to sit down on his bed and just have a talk with him. And he had a stack of road atlases sitting on the bed, and I reached over and grabbed him and started moving him. He said, hey, Jimmy, don't move my atlases. I need those things to stay close. I said, well, I'm just scooting them aside. And he says, okay, I need them to stay close. And I said, well, what for? He says, do you have any idea how many times a day a driver will call me and say, Jay, I need to know where I'm going? He says, I got to have my atlases by me so that I can tell them where their exit is. And I actually saw him several times where he'd be sitting in the kitchen on his telephone and looking at his road atlas. He was talking to a driver and he was helping them figure out where they were going on their truck drive. And there was one thing if you called Dad when he was on the road, there was, some of you might remember if you'd call him and say, hi, Dad, how you doing? He says, oh, I'm just poking along. It was just one of the words he'd say, I'm poking along. And when I was a truck driver going over the road, I kind of figured out what poking along meant. I was coming out of Denver, Colorado. I was kind of on some back roads. I was near Greeley, Colorado. And I called Dad and I told him I was taking some of these back roads that I knew that he had traveled on.
He says, well, where are you? I says, I'm in Greeley. And he says, let's see. It's 1:30 in the afternoon. If you start poking along, that check station's going to be closed by the time you get there, and they'll leave you alone. So it turned out if Dad was poking along, it's because he was avoiding having to go into a port of entry. He said, poking along, it'll run the day out, and they'll go home before you get there. But that all ties into what Shirley was mentioning about him being a little bit afraid of the law enforcement. But there were definitely members of the law enforcement that he was really good friends with. Over all the years of him being on the road, he got to know some of the DOTs and stuff, got to know him really well. And one of them was actually the head of the Utah Department of Transportation. It was Colonel Rick Glasby. And it was one time I was with Dad. We had a pretty heavy load. It was a nice size, oversized load. And we pull into the St. George Port of Entry. We come across the scales, and up on the overhead it says, come into the check station. So we circle around there, and we come in, and Dad had all of his paperwork in a big folder, and he walks in there and he sets it on the desk, and the lady at the counter looked like she was having a pretty bad day. And she grabs it and spins it around and flips it open, and she starts looking over his permits and everything. And just so happened that Colonel Clasby was there visiting the port of entry, and he came walking in and reached over the counter, took my dad's hand. JL, it is so good to see you, sir. How are you doing? And he reached over and grabbed the book and closed it without even looking at the girl. And she looked up at him, and she sat there looking at him, looking at the book. And they talk and say all their greetings there. And then Rick Clasby turned to the lady and put his hand on her shoulder, and he says, this man's paperwork is never out of order. He's good to go. And he went on his way. But Dad knew all the roads. You were trucking, Dad knew where you were at. I called him one day. I was on my way to Oregon. I was on I-84. I called him. I was telling him about how beautiful the countryside was. And he says, well, where are you? I says, I'm not really sure what part I'm in right now. I says, I'm heading to Pendleton, Oregon. He says, Jim, you're heading for the Cabbage Patch Hill. And he says, that hill is damn steep and it is scary. He says, how much do you weigh? I says, and he says, not good enough. He says, how much do you weigh? You need to find out how much you weigh before you go down that hill. He says, if you know how much you weigh, you can put your truck in the right gear and you'll go down that hill without any problems. So I picked up my paperwork and I says, well, I'm pretty light, Dad. I says, I'm loaded with empty bottles they're gonna be filling them with honey. And he said, oh, well, what do the bottles look like? I says, they look like little teddy bears. He says, that's honey bear honey out of Shady Cove, Oregon. He says, that's where you're going to be going with those, that Shady Cove. And I says, well, the paperwork just says I'm going to Pendleton. He says, oh, okay, well, yeah. He says, Honey Bear Honey Company sends their bottles to Pendleton where they get shipped back to Salt Lake. He says, so that's probably what you're doing. I says, have you hauled a load like this before? He says, yeah, a couple times. He says, we've all hauled a load of Honey Bear out of Salt Lake. So. But trucking with him was always just a lot of fun. And sometimes it came with some interesting lessons. Sometimes the lessons weren't entirely on purpose, but he taught them well. We were driving to Sedona, Arizona. And he was working for Fred Jessop down there. And we had a big machine on. Dad called it a trimmer, but what it was a roto mill. We were going down there to resurface some pavement in Sedona. And there's kind of two ways to go to Sedona. You can take 89A down in, but he had a big Cozad trailer, so it was too long, and he said he didn't want to take 89A. He wanted to go down to the 179 to get into Sedona. And he says, the reason why I want to go this way is, he says, I'm too long to go down 89A. There's some tight corners there. He says, but also because there's a church. He says, over by Sedona, there's a church that they have a great big cross carved into the mountain. He said, it is magnificent to see. You're going to want to see that. I said, okay. So when we exited off of Interstate 17 onto the 179, there's kind of a little pull-out area. Dad says, I'm going to pull over right here. I can see a chain has come loose on the trailer. So he pulled over and jumped out and was tightening that chain. And I thought, well, I'll just take this opportunity to go out and stretch my legs and go over and visit a bush. So I went over, and I had been sitting in the sleeper watching a movie on the little TV in his sleeper. And Dad jumped back up in the truck, and I heard him yell, you ready to go? And the passenger side door I left open, so he knew that I was out. So I hollered, yeah, I'm ready, and I was heading up there. And he heard my voice come out of the sleeper, so he just reached over and closed the door and put it in gear and drove away. And I took off running. I was trying to catch him, and all these ideas were going through my mind. Just jump onto the trailer and just all this, and he's gone. He headed up the road. And I'm running. I'm in a panic, and I'm freaking out. I'm like, don't leave me here, Dad, And all of a sudden it occurred to me that I don't know how far it is to that church, but he's going to want me to get out of the sleeper and see that church with the cross carved in the mountain, and he's going to realize I'm not there, so it'll be okay. So I start walking down the side of the highway, and it was a while. I don't remember how long it was, but after a little bit, here comes Dad's truck, and he was bobtailing. He went up and dropped his trailer, turned around, and he came back, and he was moving up the road. Then I seen his truck coming, and I kind of just started laughing because I realized that he must have been in a mad panic to be hauling that much butt up that road. And he comes up and slams on his brakes, and I just ran over there and jumped up into the truck and closed the door, and I'm laughing, and I look over at him, and he's going, and he's like, you know what, Jimmy? I got up the road, and I could see that church coming, and I says, Jimmy, get out of the sleeper, come and see the church. And he's, Jimmy, come on. And he says, and all of a sudden, it was really lonely in that truck. He says, I was the only one there. And he says, you don't know how much it just makes me feel so much better when I came over that hill and I could see you and you were laughing and not crying. He says, that definitely made me feel better, but please don't tell your mother about this. So it was quite a long time later before I told Mom. I think it was when we got home. This is when I told her about that, because I says, Mom, I got to tell you this funny, but trust me, it's funny. You really need to believe me that it's funny, because I don't want you to be mad at Dad. And she says, okay, if you say you don't want me to be mad at Dad, but it's funny, is this like a ha-ha funny, or I'm going to hurt him funny? But Dad, he really did love Uncle Roy. He would always talk about Uncle Roy and tell us stories about when he was working on Uncle Roy's car. So last night when I was driving home after we got done practicing here, I was on my way home, and I just got this just overwhelming feeling that Dad wanted me to read
from one of Uncle Roy's sermons. And so I started to kind of tune in on that feeling and hear what he had to say, because I believe that they can communicate from beyond. And I just felt this strong feeling that he wanted me to read from Uncle Roy. So I asked him, well, which one do you want me to read from? And he said, read from his sermons, volume 8. And I said, well, what sermon do you want me to read from? And I started fanning through the book. I said, what do you want me to read from? And he says, you'll know it when you see it. And I opened the book, and there's his bookmarker is a baby picture of Grandma Kath. And he had it bookmarked on this sermon here. And it goes really well with the proceedings of today. So I'll just read a couple paragraphs here. He says, my dear brothers and sisters, I desire the Spirit of God while I speak to direct my remarks, for I do not want to mislead you or to say anything that will cause you to lose the Spirit of God that is here today. I feel well in my spirit. I feel like we have enough around us to keep us busy and to keep us stirred up in diligence, keeping the commandments of God. This is certainly a beautiful day, and the blessings that we are receiving are beyond expectation. When we hear about what's going on around us, I can't help but acknowledge the goodness of the Lord towards us. We do not want to forget, and we want to thank the Lord for these wonderful blessings He is giving to us. When we hear the great distress that is among the people, and it is spreading from one place to another, one community to another, and one nation to another, we seem to be enjoying the spirit of peace here. And that's one thing that Dad always loved was he always loved things to be peaceful. Whenever I'd get upset about something, he'd always say, Jim, just be at peace. And no, he'd really love that. So I did eventually move home. It must have been okay with Chachi because I moved home and I started taking care of Dad in 2014. And we decided we wanted to move back to Colorado City. And we found out that we were able to get his old house out there back. But he followed along with everything he always did. He always had a room for somebody. If somebody needed somewhere to stay, they could come and stay with him. And so when we found out that we could get the house back, he said, well, I'd love to get it back, but only on the condition that there ain't anybody there because I'm not moving anybody out. So he was he was a lot of fun to be around, and his ability to speak did start to take a turn, and the words would come out all jumbled up sometimes, but I learned to speak his language and could understand what he wanted and what he needed. And he got to where he didn't like to do anything, really. He didn't even like to sit down in his room unless he knew I was home. And while I was at work, he would come in and ask Annie where I was. She'd call me sometimes and say, can you just stop by? Your dad really, really needs to just see you. He just wants to know that you're around. And so I'd swing into the house there and go in and let him know that I was still around and I hadn't left him. And one day I was talking to him and he says, I I just really like to get back to work now. I just want to go back to work. And I says, well, Dad, you've been working your butt off your entire life. Don't you want to have some fun? He says, well, I guess, if we can make it work. But he did really love the music that our family would make. He was so proud of everybody when he'd hear the music, and he always wanted to go and see the shows. Leanna's boys have a band, and they put on shows. I had a band, and we'd do these big concerts. We did the big Flog Industries does their Flog Fest, and my band did that, and it was actually just out here. And Dad I told him, I says, we're going to do a concert. And Dad says, well, I'd really like to go and watch you. I want to see you up there on the stage. And I didn't really know what to say because my band plays heavy metal. And that's a little bit harder than Elvis Presley. And so I says, Dad, I'm be honest with you, I'm a little bit embarrassed to have you hear the music that we play because it's pretty hard. It's pretty heavy. And he says, well, can I love you and even if I don't love your music? I says, absolutely. He says, then I'd like to be there, please. And so we'd take him to the shows, and every time I'd get off the stage, I'd go up to him, I'd say, Dad, did you like it? And he'd take my hand. He says, I love you. He was a very, very strong man, clear to the end. Just a few days before he passed, he wasn't communicating much, wasn't opening his eyes. And I took his hand and I was holding it, and there was some tension there. And every time I got the chance to do this, even for the 7 years that I'd taken care of him, I'd always pretend like I was having an arm wrestle with him. And I pretended because I knew he was going to beat me. He was very, very strong. And so there, just a few days before he passed, and he was laying there with his eyes closed and everything, and I picked up his hand and was holding it, and there was some tension there, and I says, I think we're having an arm wrestle. And then he just pulled my hand down. We were having an arm wrestle. He was still very, very strong. But I want to have Marge come up and talk about she took him to all of his medical appointments and stuff. She was there through a whole lot of this. So.
Well, everybody's been pretty introduced to one of the greatest guys that ever lived. I've so enjoyed hearing all those stories that I'd never heard, some of them, and some of them are very familiar to me. But us little kids, just like Becca said, we got the grandpa dad. So my dad, he was just like, how Becca said, it was her dad, she got the young daddy, but I got the older daddy. I remember me and Sam and Jim when we were little kids. And I think, and vaguely I remember this with Buffy too. He would come into the door from work, and we'd hear his Ford diesel engine drive it up, and we'd run to the door, because whoever was the first one there got to be the first one to ride on his boot when he'd walk in. And then we only had 2 feet. So we'd run over there, and whoever got to be the first one got to sit on his boot and ride it. And then he'd also sit down, and he had these work boots that would go up his leg, lace all the way up with the hooks on the top. And I remember we would kind of quarrel back and forth. That's my turn, I get to do it. But he would say, let's see who's the fastest. And we'd unlace his boots and undo them all the way down. And that was such a joy to us. And I remember one time he walked in the door, and I ran over and I grabbed his boot and sat down real fast. And he's like, well, Margie, it looks like you might be getting a little too big. So I realized at that point it was just my duty to unlace the boots from then on. One day, when I was about as tall as his belt buckle, I have this very vivid memory of going to the door when he was leaving, and he'd kissed Mom goodbye, and he'd had his breakfast, and he was gathering up to leave, and he was walking out the door, and I stopped him and I said, Dad, don't you think it's about time for me to come to work with you? And he looked down at me and said, well, I can't take you to work today. And I said, why not? And he said, well, you're not one of the boys. And I said, well, I can put some pants on. And he said, how about you stay here with Mom? And so I was like, all right, sounds good. And I remember him walking out the door, and I walked over to the window, and I pulled back the curtain, and I remember watching his truck back out of the yard and go up the road. And I remember this feeling of just, man, I'm going to miss him today. And I remember that, just had that memory my whole life, just that same memory. It was so precious. And when I got into my teenagehood, I was a pretty mouthy girl. My mom used to call me Mouth Head. So if anybody, if I've offended anyone, please do forgive me. I went and I was with him one day, and I watched a man come up to him. And I watched this man unload on my dad harshness and berating him. And I watched my dad just stand and say, I hear you, I understand. And I kept thinking, man, I'm going to kick that guy right in the shin. I'm so mad at that man right now. He was being so mean to my dad. And I kept wondering, why isn't my dad telling him to be quiet and walk away? But he just stood there and, well, I appreciate your input. Thank you for that. And then we walked away, and I raced up and took my dad's hand, and I looked up at him and I said, Dad, why didn't you tell that man to just go away? He was not right what he was saying. That was so mean. And he said, oh, Margie, you don't know the whole story. That man might be suffering somehow. He said, we don't know what's going on in his life. So it behooves us to be kind and to see where we can give. And he told me one time, being a blessing to others is the greatest gift you can ever give. When I was about 13 years old, my sister, Shirley, she had kids and she was busy, and I happened to be a girl in the summertime that didn't have a whole lot to do except for get into mischief with my friends. She would call and ask if somebody could come and help her with their kids. And my dad would be like, yeah, Margie, how about you head over there and help Shirley? And one day I was like, why do I always have to go? I have other stuff to do. How come I can't? And I remember he came and took my hand. And he walked over to the piano and he pulled out an old green Sunday school songbook. And he opened it up and he placed it on the piano and he said, I want you to play that song right there. So I started to play it for him. And he sang it. And the song was called Call Me. And he said, and the song's words are to the effect of, call me where I may be of service, Lord. And he said, that's the reason we're here. That's going to bring you the greatest hope. That's going to make you the happiest girl you ever saw, is if you can be a blessing to someone else. He said, make that your motto. Call me
where I may be of service, Lord. And it was so special to me. I remember it. Sometimes if I was feeling kind of tough, like, well, got to do all this stuff and I don't even get paid for it, man, then I remembered this thought. Call me, because I have a talent and I am so grateful to share. Whatever the talent is that I can show up. If my talent happens to be cleaning the house that day, I was glad to do it, because I remember what Dad said. One day, my whole life growing up, my mom used to tease about my name. She'd say, I remember hearing that Marjorie isn't the name you name a little baby girl, it's the name you name your grandmother. And I remember my dad saying, well, grandmothers were baby girls once. Anyway, I had had my third child, and I was holding her, and I remember my mom saying, what are you guys going to name her? What's her name going to be? And I said, I'm still trying to figure that one out. I haven't quite figured out what that's going to be. And she said, well, whatever you do, don't name her something that's going to be a grandmother name, because... And my dad was like, well, just a minute. And he said, Marge, would you like me to tell you where your name came from? I said, I actually would really like to hear that. He told me the story about when his dad went up to Salt Lake and picked him up on the motorbike, brought him home. He told me he had been getting into some mischief and he was kind of a little yahoo. He said, I got into town, and because I was kind of wild, I didn't have a whole lot of friends. I was kind of an outcast. But I had this angel came along, and she gathered me up, and she was an angel mother to me. Her name was Marjorie, Aunt Marjorie Home. She took care of him like she was his mother. And I remember growing up, the same thing. She took me in like as if I was her granddaughter. And he said, when you came along and I had you in my arms, I looked at you and I said, now this is an angel. What does this baby need to be named? It needs to be named an angel name. So I gave you the name of an angel, Marjorie. So that was very special to me. Growing up, and I remember this time during the time, we all, if you haven't seen the pictures and already realized, he was a trucker since he was about 13 years old. He'd been driving diesel trucks and fixing them, and he was a master mechanic. Mom told me a story when we were growing up. She said that back in the day before cell phones, and there were pay phones, she said there was times that she would need to talk to him. She said, so guess how I got a hold of him, because I didn't have a cell phone. I'd go in and I'd kneel down and I'd say, Lord, I need you to tell him to call. She said within minutes, I remember, I would get a phone call. And in those days, I would have to get a phone call through Uncle Edson's home. So Grandpa Edson's house had a telephone. So she would go across the neighbors, because here comes the call. She knew it would be there, because he heard in his heart to call Mom. Anyway, along the road, Sam, my baby brother, just came up and said to me, please tell the story about why there are so many pictures of wildflowers back there. And this was another thing that was very, very precious that he would do for Mom on the road. He would stop in every state, and he would gather up the wildflowers from off of the side of the road. And Sam said sometimes he'd be riding along in the truck, and he'd be like, what are we doing? Dad says, well, I got to stop. I see a field full of wildflowers. He'd be like, oh, man, can we just go home? My dad was like, no, this is very special. And he'd hop out and he'd grab those wildflowers. And Mom said he'd bring home wildflowers sometimes that were a little bit wilted, and some of them were kind of dead. And she said, but that didn't matter. The fact is that he stopped and he took care of those wildflowers. And it was better than any big diamond ring or any big showing of, thank you, Taddy. So sweet, thank you. Any big showing of money could buy. It was very beautiful, the thought. And that's the kind of person he was. When she would go trucking with him, and I think Joe might have touched on this a little, but I wanted to tell a little bit about it because I took him, I was the one that got to take him and drive him around towards the end. Mom would be driving down the road, and in order to keep him awake, she'd tell him jokes, and his laugh, if he was really hee-hawing, he'd go, hmm. And that was it. So she said they're driving down the road, and she told a joke, and then she'd tell another joke, and so she's like, he's not even laughing at my jokes. Well, I'll show him. So they started driving down the road, and he knew all the landmarks all the way along. And he'd say, Kathy, you got to take a look over here. Look at that. Coming up on the right, or coming up on the left, you got this and this and this and that, and the other thing happened there in such and such year. And Mom would be like, look away. And he'd be like, Kathy, you're going to miss it. You're going to miss it. And Mom Kathy, she said, if you're not going to laugh at my jokes, I'm not looking at your mountains. But that is something he did the whole time I was driving him. It didn't matter where I went. He knew where I was, and he knew exactly what had happened there, what year it had been, and it didn't matter how, all the way to the very end, he remembered details of everything that had happened. It was amazing. I took him to an appointment in St. George just a few months ago. And as we drove by the mountain where he always would point, he did it every time as if I'd never heard the story. And I loved every single time. But he'd point over and he'd say, you see that mountain right there? If you look really close, you might be able to see there's a chain that comes down there. And for years and years and years, there was a chain. And when he was a young kid, he'd start at the bottom of the chain and he'd climb all the way up that mountain. It's just the backside of El Cap. I don't know where it's at, exactly what it's called. Cable Mountain. He said I'd climb all the way up until I could no longer pull the chain again away from the mountain because my hands would get too close to the chain. And he says at that point I'd have to climb back down. But I was so determined I was going to climb to the top of that mountain. And I remember his details of those are spot on every single time. He was so very well versed in all of the land from all over. When I lived in Central, he would call me, and he'd be trucking for Andrus Trucking in St. George. And he'd call me and he'd say, now if you come down to the road and you're at such and such place on Highway 18 and you look straight across the valley, you'll see my lights flashing at such and such time. If you'll be there, I'll flash my lights for you guys. So I drove down there, and I'd get my kids all ready, and we'd watch. And yep, for sure, clear across the valley of St. George, there was his lights flashing, just like he said. And he was so very good at it. I got a lot of time where I got to go and bring him treats. I'd make his favorite stuff for him and bring it to him. And one day he called me, and he said, hey, Margie, I'm just driving right past your place. Is there a way you can come out and meet me? I said, sure thing. Is there anything I can bring you? Oh, just bring the kids and say hi. So I hopped in the car and drove out into the road where he was going to be passing by. And he pulled his big truck off. And he had no idea. He had no idea because I hadn't told him that we were struggling so hard. We were hungry, and we were about to lose the house that we were living in, because we couldn't make the payment. And he'd pull out there, and he did this more than once. He did this many times. And he'd hop out of the diesel, and he'd come around and give each of the kids a little goodie. And then he'd hand me an envelope. And I said, Dad, what's this? And he said, well, sometimes the Lord puts some money in my pocket that doesn't belong to me. And then he tells me who it belongs to. And this time he said, it belongs to Margie. And I'd open it up. And more than once, it was exactly what we needed to make sure that we could make our payment. He listened. He'd listen with his heart. If you've ever seen anybody believe in God and believe in being service to someone, to their fellow man, that was my dad. One day, we moved to Montana. We moved up to Bozeman, Montana. And I got a call around 2018, the beginning. And they told me, it was Buffy called me. She said, Dad's not doing very good. He's sitting here downstairs. And I had the opportunity during that time I lived in Central that I got to make sure he got to an appointment. And it was kind of one of those things, Dad, you need to go to the doctor. And he said, no, I'm fine. And the experience of that coming about happened to have my mom involved. And she said, JL, go to the doctor. And he said, no, I'm fine. Well, I said, Mom, I'll promise to you, I'll make sure he gets to the doctor. I'll go get him and I'll take him to the doctor. And that was back in about 2012. Well, I took him to the doctor and he ended up having to stay home for a week with an IV to fix the leg because he waited too long because he was working so hard. Anyway, so I had an ability to communicate with him, and he seemed to do what I say. So my sister Buffy called me at the beginning of 2018, and she says, Dad's not doing so good. Something's going on. He doesn't look good. He doesn't even look like himself. And he's not making a whole lot of sense. And I said, oh, let me talk to him. So I said, Dad? He said, hey. And I said, listen, Buffy said you're not looking so good. He said, I'm fine. I said, hey, listen, if Buffy says you're not looking so good, don't you think it's about time to go to the doctor? And he just, no, I think I'm fine. I said, you know what? I'm going to come get you, take you to the doctor, or Buffy's going to take you right now. So I think the best thing is for you to go right now, and I'll come down and visit. He's like, oh, all right. So Buffy ended up being able to get him on and head him to the hospital, where he ended up having kidney failure. And it started a whole chain of getting him tested and find out what's going on. Because he was always so busy, he didn't have time to go home and just take care of his body. Well, at that time, we found out he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And they said also that he had a deteriorating brain condition, dementia. And I thought, well, I went down there at that time and I sat with him. He kept saying, I don't need to be in here, I'm just fine. And I didn't know what to expect because I didn't know those are big, scary things to be diagnosed with. So I didn't know quite what to be doing for him. But as the time went on, I started realizing sometimes his words weren't making a lot of sense. But his mind was never, ever confused. It was his words that wouldn't come out properly. So I learned that I needed to do what Mom did, and that was communicate without words. It was communicate with our hearts. So I started listening to my heart and hearing what he had to say. And at that point, I remember he'd say a word, and it didn't make a whole lot of sense, and then I'd listen, and the first thing that would come to my mind, and I'd ask him, is this what you're talking about? And a lot of times that's what it was. But I started driving him back and forth, and as the year went on, it's just you could tell he was getting lower and lower. And Lewis went ahead and he said, call all your siblings and ask them if they'd like to go on a trip. So Lewis paid for a trip and put us on the road for a full day in this big loop of basically our backyard. And all of us kids who could make it hopped in this big bus and gave Dad a mic and a speaker. And then we would head down the road, and he told us about the landscape, the memories of Uncle Roy, everything that just was so precious to us, and we got to spend that time with him. And us girls would sit there, and we started just like getting to where we'd be talking and laughing, and he'd say, well, I'd tell you if you'd all be quiet. Through this whole experience, he never had a time where he saw me and didn't know who I was, except for one time. And it was the very last time that I went to pick him up, to take him to the doctor for the last time. I went into the house, and he had been sleeping, and I walked in and I tapped him on the shoulder, and I said, hey, Dad, I'm here. And he looked up at me, and he was very confused, and he said, no, they've already come. And he was talking about the nurse. The nurse had already come by and checked him out. And I said, oh, okay, good. That's good. Well, I'm here to get you. We're going on an adventure today. And he said, well, they've already come. where am I going? And I said, oh, I'm going to take you to the doctor, remember? I always come get you and take you to the doctor. And he said, well, they'll be wondering where I'm at. He was talking about Jim and Annie. He said, they don't like it if I go. They need me to stay. And I said, well, didn't Jim tell you today I'm coming to get you? And he said, well, okay, if that's what he said, but I can tell you right now, they're not going to be too happy. I was like, man, this is pretty tough. I mean, I claim to be his favorite daughter, and he's forgetting who I am. So I got him out in the car, and I started to drive up the road, and he said, where are we going? And I said, we're going to Kanab. And I thought it would be fun, because we'll take the back road. Well, okay, so maybe I don't know the darn way to Kanab, because guess what? I started driving there, and he said, where are you going? I said, to Kanab. We're going to Kanab. I turned on the sand road, and if anybody knows what that is, it's not the way to Kanab. So he already didn't know who I was, and now I was kidnapping him. So I kept driving along, and he'd say, where are we going? And I said, to Kanab. We're going to Kanab. And he just, okay, whatever, this lady. She's one of them. Anyway, I got all the way out where all of a sudden I had no cell service. And then all of a sudden I started going, wait, where is Kanab? And all that whole time he kept saying, I don't know why you're going this way. And I'm like, well, because we're going to Kanab. And then finally when I realized that he was talking because I didn't know my way to Kanab, it was only because I was out of cell service and couldn't find the map. So I had to say, well, how do we get there? And he knew how to get to Kanab. He didn't remember who I was that specific day, but he knew how to get to Kanab. So he got us to Kanab, and as soon as the doctor appointment was over, in the doctor appointment, the doctor came in and said, and who's this lovely lady with you? And I said, it's his favorite daughter. And he turned to me right then and said, oh, she's one of the good ones. So right then I realized he knew who I was. Anyway, so when we started driving home, I stopped by and I got him some lunch, and he said, I really got to get Joe on the phone. And I was like, okay. I got Joe on the phone, which is Jim. And I knew who he was talking about because he called Joe Dad and he called Jim Jimmy, or Joe. So I called up Joe over here, and he chatted with him. Well, she's got me here, and just wanted to make sure you guys knew where I went. I just didn't want you to think I hauled off. I knew you'd be worried. And Jim said, yeah, that's awesome. Okay, cool. So I hang up the phone, and I started driving back from Kanab around the other way where I was supposed to be driving in the first place. And he said, now, if you'll watch up here on the left side of the road, you're going to see that's where Merrill, and then he started talking about the jobs, and he remembered every bit of it. There was no hesitation in his mind, no confusion in his words. He knew exactly what it was. And I was like, you do remember that stuff. And then he told me about the port of entry and all the way around where he told me about the ship on the rock that looks like a ship, all the way back home. And it was so precious. I was so grateful that he ended up recognizing his favorite daughter. All my life growing up, I remember him coming in the house, and a man would come over and pick up a check or drop something off, and he'd always have him come in and just like my older sisters said, that it felt like that they were being held hostage while he showed off his kids and their talents. So he'd say, Margie, sit down at the piano and show him the song. And I'd say, which song do you want me to play? And I was little, pretty little. The one where your fingers are going real fast. So any song I pulled up, he would be so proud of. He'd just stand there and just grin. And whoever was there, I really appreciate you sitting there and humoring my dad and thinking that we had talent. But one day I said to him, Dad, how come all those guys come over and then you make me sit down and play? How come? And he said, because, Margie, God gave you that talent. That talent is not for you to keep. That talent is for you to share. And more you share it, the more you'll have. So I remember thinking, okay. And he said, and the reason why he had to tell me this part is because I'd gotten a little older. And he said, sit down and play the song for these guys. And I said, I don't dare. He said, oh, Margie, sit down, play it. And I was like, oh, I was kind of being, And it was later that he said, don't hold back. Because if you could see the joy on their faces when you play, then you would never hold it back. So at that time, I remember thinking, all right, if I'm ever asked to play, I won't say, oh, it's okay, I'm not that. I will say, yes, I'd be happy to. And to this day, that's what I do now. I do that for a living, and I'm so lucky, just like my brother. I have a band as well. And I'm able to write music and share it with the whole world, and it's such a blessing, thanks to my dad. My mom, of course, was the one that taught us how, but if it weren't for our dad sitting there telling us, you got to share it, I don't think I'd be doing this today. On the 4th of July last year, he came up, and after the show, I'd been asked to close out the day on the 4th of July in our town. I saw him sitting down there in the audience, and such a big deal. After the show, he came up to me after, and he always did after all my shows. He came up to me and he said, do you know today marks the first day? And I said, the first day for what? He said, the first day I saw Uncle Fred right here, and he was smiling. And I thought that was so special. I said, do you think he enjoyed it? Oh, yeah. All the way back and forth, I would sing to my dad. If he started to get anxious or anything towards the end of his days, Jim and Annie sometimes would call me, and I'd go over there. And I remember this specifically one time. I went in and sat down, and he came in and sat on the couch. When I first walked in the door, as you guys had already been introduced, or they'd already talked about the raid earlier, sometimes his memories would be very vivid of those days, and he'd have a lot of anxiety from that. And I walked in the door one day, and he was very anxiously looking out the front window. And Jim was standing there talking to him, telling him, oh, it's going to be okay, Dad. Everything's okay. And I said, what's going on? Hi. And he turned around, oh, hi. And he took his arms and he gathered me up and he walked me into the kitchen where I could get away from the window. And I said, what's going on? He said, oh, nothing to see here. And I was like, okay, well, what's happening? He said, well, what can I do for you? And he kept moving me away. And I turned to Jim and I said, what's going on? He said, he wants to keep the children safe from the men outside trying to gather up the kids. I didn't realize until that point how much that impacted his life. So I went in and sat down at the piano, and he sat down on the couch, and he was so precious to me about it. He was in the biggest hurry to get back and keep the kids safe, but he was so kind to me. I said, I wrote a new song. Would you like to hear it? He's like, mm-hmm. So I started playing, and I sang my song, and I turned around, did you like it? Mm-hmm. And he looked at his watch. I really got to get it going, though. But he stayed there the whole time, and it was so precious. I loved how much he enjoyed our family. When I was about 16 years old, I had decided I was going to make a great big change in my life. And I was going to do my own thing, and I was going to go off and have my own life. And I didn't tell anybody about it. I had that in my mind. I made it up in my mind. And I was going to just figure it out, head out, do my thing. And in the middle of the day, literally that day, Dad came home in the middle of the day, which he never did. He was always working. He came home and he walked in the house, and I was like, what are you doing here? And my mom, I heard her say it in the other room, what are you doing? He said, where's Margie? She says, she's in the kitchen. He came in and he said, Margie, I want to talk to you. I said, sure. I sat down because I've always been pretty damn good friends with my dad. He sat down and pulled up a chair, and he sat me at the chair, and he said, you know what the best thing is to do? I said, what? And he said, listen to your heart. I said, okay. Where's this coming from? He said, praying and asking God for his will and then listening to your heart. So I said, okay. And he said, all I wanted to do today is come home and tell you, you are doing so good. Don't give up. I'm so proud of you. Don't give up. He listened to his heart that day because he changed my heart that day. Watching him exit this beautiful world we live in made me realize what a beautiful life he lived. It was so beautiful. He was peaceful the whole time. The people that came to see him that we could see were beautiful friends and family. And the people that we couldn't see, we knew were beautiful friends and family because of the way he reacted. Every person that came in, he knew was there, and he sent love out, and you could feel it. He wanted all of his kids there. He waited till Toad got back. He wouldn't go away until he had all the kids around. I got to sit right next to him and hold his hand during that time. And I remember thinking, man, I feel like that little girl that's as tall as his belt buckle. And I'm asking him, why do you got to go to work? And I remember as he took his last breath, how beautiful I saw him as he drove away. And I thought, man, I'm going to miss him. But the most awesome thing, just like he always said, there's such beauty in the gray clouds and there's always a silver lining, is that every time I look at my family, he's here. And Mom's here. I see it in every one of you. And I love you so much. Thanks, Jim and Annie. Thank you so much for taking care of him. And thank you, Donia. By the way, I wanted to say thanks to Donia. She showed up like an angel at the end. There she was. Came in there and I swooped in and made sure everybody was okay and made sure Dad was okay, and he was so comfortable with her being there. And I told her yesterday, I feel so sorry for the rest of the world that doesn't have you. Thanks to all of you for showing up. It really means so much. I love you all so much. I wrote a song for my dad, and in as much as he always loved me to sing for him, I want to sing this for you guys right now. I'd race to the door when he'd walk in, to ride on his boot, give a kiss on his chin. Most wonderful man ever in my 4-year-old eyes. He was a giant and he was so wise. Growing up, I heard my mama say, he is my friend. I knew their love would stay. We didn't have money, but we had so much more.
than anything money could buy from the store. In his big trucks we'd have fun on the road, though he was carrying more than an oversized load. Weight of the world, but you'd never know. He was the toughest, the bravest, Daddy, my hero. Going through all the memories of life, I see he was careful to never waste time on things that don't matter at the end of the day. His nature was gentle, that was his way. His quiet spirit, his patient love, I observed kindness, and he'd say, because being of service is the greatest thing. His motto was, call me, and I saw a king. Over and over I'd watch as he'd go. He never turned anyone away, even though he had the weight of the world, but you'd never know. He was the toughest, the bravest, Daddy, my hero. I sat with my dad as he took his last breath. I witnessed this beautiful man lay to rest. And though it was so hard to tell him goodbye, he earned his glorious throne in the sky. Abundantly clear as I watched him go, how well he had lived his life here below. No more weight of the world, and now you all know. He was the toughest, the bravest, Daddy, my hero. My daddy, my hero.
I thank Heavenly Father for what he does for all of his children. And I pray for his, his spirit to be with me and be with us as I give a few expressions. I appreciate the exhibition of Heavenly Father's kindness that we've witnessed today. The illustrations, the love that's been exhibited, for a man that many of us have had significant contact with through the years. I feel privileged because of the efforts of my parents to have had an early exposure to JL. As a result of the 1944 raid, my parents became interested in what was going on in Short Creek. As a result, our family joined the priesthood work. We were in Woodso at the time, but shortly, because of the development in Bloomington, we were involved in developing that area as a farming community, nothing like it is today. So the Christmas of 1944, I rode, came with the family from St. George, where we were living at the time, the children going to school there, while Father was involved in developing the farmland there at Bloomington. But Christmas, we came here. We stayed in a white, this is the recollection of a 5-year-old, stayed in a white tent just east of where Aunt Leota and Aunt Aline were living. So my very first acquaintances in this community was Aunt Leota and Aunt Aline and JL, who would have been 3, Parky, that's all I knew of him for years. Parky was a toddler. Diana was just a babe, as I recall. But that initiated a friendship forgive me for my weakness. That was the beginning of a friendship that has lasted all these years. The time of the 1953 raid, by that time Aunt Leota had had some some unique feelings. There had been some separation. And law enforcement thought that they had a prime target. For someone to turn state's evidence. JL enjoyed telling of this experience. Because when she was approached to divulge sacred incriminating evidence, JL was so pleased that her response was drop dead. And if you know Aunt Leota, you would know how that would sound. So we had an awareness of each other through the years. But in my teens, and some of the remarks that have been said here today sparks the memories. In my teens, Uncle Edson was doing some work for my father up in Sandy. I think it was a retaining wall that he was building. And he said that JL was there in town, but someone had called him and expressed some concern about his welfare. So he was going to go gather him up. I had no idea ballet was involved. Just don't. Did you? No, life is full of surprises. The next thing I knew, he was helping Uncle Thurl drive a Ford F600 because Uncle Thurl needed help. So here's this 16-year-old driving this bobtail truck around for helping people. Just exactly what Uncle Thurl was all involved with it, I don't know. But I think Uncle Marion had purchased, I think maybe my father was involved with purchasing the truck also. But that got JL involved away from theater, I guess, but helping people, and that was Jay. Well, as time went on, we went on our work missions. I was involved in what was called the Major Digging Company. Uncle Loren Zitting, Uncle Irwin Fisher, Uncle Orville was actually involved right at that time. But my father had talked with Loren Zitting to see if there was a spot there for me. I had just graduated from high school. So that's where I went to work and was involved in that form of work, greater or less degree till now. But I had been working for the Tempest Company after the Major Digging Company, doing well. And JL was involved in that, operating a backhoe here in this community. And he was involved in a subcontract contracting or renting the machine to the Tempest Company up there in a town that's called Copperton, which used to be a company town by there at Bingham Canyon Mine. But they had sold the town, but they were installing gas into it. So that's where JL was involved with the Tempest Company. Okay. He came to me one day and he said that Mayo Stubbs, Harvey Dockstader, and he were interested to know if I would consider coming and going in business with them. And that's as unlikely a setup as I can even imagine right now. But just the same, it was the thing to do. My boss at the Tempest Company thought I was nuts. That he certainly didn't recommend it. But it was the thing to do. And we listened to our heart. Each of us does. Completely dependent on Heavenly Father. Isn't that the case with all of us? Every soul here is dependent on what Heavenly Father has in store for each one of us. Contention isn't part of the program. We are here completely dependent on Heavenly Father. So, as I've heard these events that have sparked some memories down through time, it's been sweet. Uncle Roy purchased a diesel-powered Cadillac one time. And he insisted that Jay be close by because that was new territory. And he had a lot of confidence in JL's talent in keeping that car running. So JL was thrilled to relate to me Uncle Roy having close contact with him regarding that vehicle. And that's just JL. We were in business together for a couple of years. I have fond memories of Jay's dedication. He had a gift of gab like few people have, and sometimes some people might weary of it. But his heart was gold. He knew where his allegiance was, and I'm grateful for his memory. I treasure the time we've had here. I thank Heavenly Father for all that he does for each one of us. And I pray for every soul here. I do it in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
and I will forever feel your strength when I need it most. You're gone now, gone but not forgotten. I can say this to your face, but I know you hear. I'll see you again. You never really left. I feel you walk beside me. I know I'll see you again. When I'm lost, I'm missing you like crazy. I tell myself I'm so blessed to have had you in my life. I'll see you again. You never really left. I feel you walk beside me. I know I'll see you again. When I had the time to tell you, never thought I'd live to see the day when the words I should have said would come to haunt me. In my darkest hour, I tell myself I'll see you again. I'll see you again. Never really left. I feel you walk beside me. I know I'll see you again. Someday I'll see you again. I'll see you again. You never really left. I feel you walk beside me. I know I'll see you again. I will see you again. See you again.
There's papers with lyrics that were on your chairs when you came in. The family wanted me to remind you to take them with you. Just help sing along at the graveside. The interment for Father will be at the Isaac Carling Memorial Park in Colorado City. The pallbearers are his son Sam, the grandsons Sonny, Wonky, Jay, Cody, Joshua, Heber, Joby, Jaywood, and Charlie. The dedication of the grave will be by dear Uncle Alvin, his good friend for so many years. After the program at the graveside, I would like to invite you all to my front lawn. There's a luncheon being catered there, and please come. There's plenty of food. Thank you so much for being such a patient congregation. We're a dramatic family. We'll always be a dramatic family. And we just appreciate your patience. The benediction will be offered by Brad.
Our kind wise Father, we come before you at the end of this graduation exercise for our sweet Father, J.L. We thank you for allowing us to be with him in the life that he has led. We thank you for all those who have gone before us, given us the examples that they have lived for us. We thank you for this opportunity of hearing wonderful stories and feeling the wonderful spirits you've given us. We pray you may be with us as we go from here to the graveside, that no harm will be upon us. We thank you for your sweet spirit that's been with us. We pray you may continue with us. We say this in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Shirley, would you, or Leanna, one of you give us a pitch, and we'll sing God Be With You Till We Meet Again, a cappella, as we follow him out. One more thing. How long does it take us to get to the, about 40 minutes, so what time would that be? Okay, we'll just meet there in 1 hour from now. Okay.